Hi everyone, I'm Joey. So this video is not so much a making video as an idea video, which does incorporate some making. So a couple of times a year, enough times that I'm kind of missing out on work, people ask me about making glazed wooden joinery, and it's always a bit of a problem. It's pretty difficult to do efficiently. There's obviously lots of ways to skin this cat, but I wanted to come up with a way that was efficient and adequate, I suppose is the best term. It's not going to be super high-end, but it's going to be like a paint quality kind of finish that is usable. So I wouldn't necessarily take on, I don't think ever, doing a house lot of wooden joinery, but every now and then people come to me and ask for one window. Because they've decided to cut a hole in the side of the house or whatever, or they need a repair or replacement, and I want to offer something that I want to be able to offer something that is actually efficient to make. Now, usually wooden joinery is made efficiently by giant machines, and usually that is several types of spindle molder, and of course I don't have one, so I wanted to come up with a solution where I can pretty much use the tools I have. I mean, there must be a way to do this with the tools I have. So that's where I started. With glazed joinery, the problem comes is that you have a profile that looks something like this, with a rebate for the glass and a nice beveled profile, and you need to join that, and it can be a bit tricky. There are other router bit sets for this kind of thing, but they all have a curved profile, which doesn't really suit most of the homes here in New Zealand and probably around the world. It's a bit of an older style, more for like a Victorian villa style type of home. So I have this CMT set. Some of the bits are missing actually. This works, and you've seen me use this on a Sapelli door in another video. But this is that curved profile I was talking about, where it's just not really the look I'm going for. It also means I have to pretty much destroy the router bits. You can see here I've pulled one of them apart just to be able to use it in the way I need to be able to use it. So it's just not ideal. $469 set that I do use, but it's really not being used enough. But we'll see if that comparison is any good later on. So I need to make this large set of French doors, and so I'm just going to quickly go over how I make the door frame. In my case, I can pick up the door jamb and sill pre-molded off the shelf, including the groove for the weather stripping, so it really makes life easier. So the window is 3 meters long, so it's pretty unwieldy, so I'm doing a lot of it by hand just because it's easier. Where the jamb comes down and meets the sill, the outside of the sill is on a 4 degrees slope, and the flat part of the sill is, well, flat. So it's a bit of a tricky little cut to make. With the rebates made, I can then work out how long the actual side of the jamb needs to be. And again, straight off the shelf, I can get this awesome mullion stock. It's made out of 2 pieces and saves a lot of time. Can anyone else spot the massive mistake I'm making right here? I find out later on. So I'm using a sealant adhesive on all my joints, just to try and keep the water out as long as possible, and screwing this in with stainless screws. Okay, so I've taken all that off because I stuffed up pretty majorly, so I thought it was all going too smoothly. Currently it's set up to fit something like this, which looks really nice, but in actual fact this rebate here is going to line up with this one because the door sits here, so this whole thing needs to be sitting there, which means my mullions are slightly short. I need to cut the 4-degree angle on to match the sill, so that's going to make everything a little bit shorter. It also means I'm left with a small bit of my mortise showing at the back, but that can be bogged up. So it kind of stuffs things around a little bit, but I can make it work, hopefully. Because of the thickness of the wall this door's going into, I had to add an extra 25 millimeters, I think it was, to the width of the jamb. So I'm just doing that now. And after this I primed everything. But then I could get to the actual job at hand, which was getting ready to make these doors and windows. So first I could dress everything up. I should mention that these particular windows I'm making will be single glazed, but I have come up with a double glazed solution as well, so if you stick around to the end you will see that as well. I'm using treated pine for these doors, as it's pretty stable. I actually managed to get mostly quarter and rift sawn stock, so that was pretty good, and it's nice and cheap. So I figured the best place to start is to put the profile onto the edge of all my pieces, and then I could kind of work my way through all the steps needed. So I'm just using a standard 45-degree bit. Okay, looking at the stiles from end on, we've got the arras which are formed. I haven't yet formed the glazing rebate, but I need to know how long my rail needs to be between the two stiles. So I know my total width of the door or window wants to be 582 mil. I need a minus of the width of each stile. Happens to be 81.5 mil on each side. So that gives me a length of 419 mil between the edge of the stiles. I then need to add on 15 millimeters length to my rail on each end to go into this glazing rebate. So that will be 419 plus 30 mil length in here of 449. Okay, so because the 15 mil glass rebate comes in exactly 4 millimeters longer than the end of this arras, I think this is 11 mil from this point to this point, and this is 15 mil. So there's a 4 millimeter difference. So what I need to do before I can cut the arras cope cut on the end of my rails is come in 4 millimeters from the end of my rail, make a small cut, and then I can do the cut on the end. So I made up this jig. It's pretty simple, and apart from the fact that I've got a sliding table, it doesn't really make it any different from using this on any other table saw. So you can see here the reason for that 4mm cut at the beginning is so I can have a straight or a little flat part that is 1.5mm deep, the same depth as the quirk on the chamfer. So then using my dado stack I could remove pretty much all of the waste necessary in the rest of that cope cut, as well as mostly destroying my jig. It ended up with a pretty clean cut. It's just a very tiny little point left at the base of the chamfer that wasn't removed. And again with the dado stack I could create the large or the long glazing rebates along each of the pieces. The smaller glass dividers, I left the arras off so I had a square piece to work with first while I made the large rebates, and then set up the 45-degree bit again just to finish those pieces. I just had to remove that little point that wasn't cut away. It was very easy with a chisel, and then I could actually join the pieces together. So you may have guessed at this stage that I'm not going to do a traditional mortise and tenon for the main joinery. I need to do something that is a bit quicker, and I think that that's just going to eat up a whole lot of time versus the price point that I'm kind of aiming at. So the next obvious solution would be to use some dominoes. It's essentially the same thing, but I've only got the smaller domino, and you can see that I just don't get enough depth, and even as it is with the small domino I can only go in 25mm max, so that's just not going to work. So ideally the large domino would be a really good option at this point. That would be perfect to kind of solve all my problems. I don't have one, and I'm not going to go and spend kind of $2,000 on one just yet. So what I'm going to do is something you've never seen before from me, is use a doweling jig. Now you may never see me use dowels again after this job, but we'll see how that goes. So I found this jig. It's pretty cool. It's self-centering, and it's got 4 different size bushings which we drilled out to all be the same size, so they all have 10mm holes in them now. I also added a rare earth magnet onto the end so I can reference all the time from one end, and it seems pretty good. It's really well built, and so it seems like it should work just fine. It is about $89 worth, New Zealand. Doesn't actually have a name. It's maybe the Eagle, so I guess it's made in the States. So initially I was quite excited about this jig. Everything seemed to be going quite well, but the more and more I used it, the more and more iron filings I found about the place, and you can see them sticking everywhere on the jig, and the holes just started slogging out, and you can see there's misalignment, and it really didn't last too long for its accuracy. I carried on because I wanted to persevere and see if this was a viable solution, and this is about as good a jig as you're going to get, I guess. So the glue up went surprisingly smoothly. Everything just kind of slotted in where it was meant to, so that was good. It was about this point I realized that there was some issues with the joinery, that the misalignment in some of the dowels had caused some of the pieces to not line up very well. Some of them lined up really nicely, but some of them it just wasn't consistent enough. There's a few things like this where it was about a half a mil out of alignment, and so it's annoying. So it's something that's not easy to fix really, so we had to just put some bog on there, and you'll see later on there's a couple of bog patches on the doors. But with all that kind of by the wayside, we persevered, and we got the first side lights installed. So they were screwed in. Next I could trim the doors and cut the angle on the bottom of the door, the same 4 degrees as the sill, and generally trim the door to width. So the easiest way to paint something like this is just spray it. Now I've got this new little Graco sprayer which works pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it goes, so that really sped things up. After the first coat of paint, I was able to seal around the side lights on the inside with some regular gap filler, and on the outside with a waterproof rubber sealant that is also paintable. After another 2 coats of paint, I could add the weather stripping into the door frame. Okay, sorry for the really wide shot, but it's as big as this set is. It's about 3 meters long and 2.1 tall. So everything turned out pretty good. There's a slight twist in one of the doors. That's because I had issues with the dowels, but at the moment it's sitting pretty good. I was thinking about these enclosed windows where they have a full frame, and I'm pretty sure, given that it's fully fixed in with a frame, that something like that doesn't need dowels or any real tenanting in the corners. Certainly for like a small average size, meter by meter or something like that, you could just get away with, I'm talking about a fixed window that's not going to open. You could get away with just coating the pieces and epoxying together and putting them in a frame, fixing them in place. I think that would work just fine. So with the basic concept of these doors essentially proved, I thought I would move forward with the idea and look at some custom tooling for my router table. So I drew up some drawings, sent them off to a tool maker, and there was a bit of backwards and forwards. 3 weeks later, these little or large things showed up. This bigger one for single glazed joinery in a 44mm thick door. And this smaller bit is for double glazing. It's also for a 44mm thick door. Now, if you've ever wondered what it costs to get 2 one-of-a-kind bits made, well, there you go. I was a bit dubious about doing this in one pass, but actually the bit coped with it really well. I will say that I do have a 3 horsepower Triton router, so it can handle this very easily, well, capably. So it's pretty neat in that once the cope cuts are done, everything can be set from that. So you can set the arris and the dado height from that that one coat cut, and it takes a little bit of finagling with the exact heights. So I thought I would give the double glazing bit a bit of a try. Because of the very fine tolerances on this kind of joint, I had to do some very fine adjustments to the finish fit. Something that became apparent with the double glazing version is that there's a very large flat spot with the large glazing rebate, and it seems like a perfect spot to add dominoes, and the domino fits in perfectly well. My small one does, so I imagine the big one would do just as adequately. So I tried putting some dominoes in this one into that flat spot. You got very nice reference points, and it turns out it works really well. So when you use double glazing, you have to put a packer underneath the glazing unit. In this case, I'm just using some little 2mm packers. I believe the recommendation is 3mm minimum. The reason is this rubber that's in between the glass, the sealant, apparently doesn't like to sit in water. It can actually break down. So you need to sit it on the bottom of the window. It has to sit on packers to let water to be able to drain out, or at least not sit in there constantly. So then when you add your glazing beads, you have to include a drainage hole to let the water out, and they would be every so often along the glazing bead. Now this glazing unit is 20mm thick. That allows for a 10mm thick glazing bead, which is about as small as you could probably want to go to try and put some kind of panel pin down through this chamfer down into the door. Now, if you wanted to go to a wider double glazing unit or a triple glaze, you really are going to need to beef up the thickness of the door rails and stiles to somewhere around 60mm, which does throw up a few problems as far as standard door frames and locks go. And it's not something that really isn't necessary in this country, New Zealand, so it's something that I have no experience with really. Double glazing is standard now, but there are so many homes still not needing it. That's why I've got the single glazed option. So I thought I wanted to try adding an integral tenon just to see how that works. Okay, so I'm actually really liking the way I could make a tenon very quickly with this. So my thought here is that I would still buy the larger domino, and this has ended up 15mm, and I believe you can get a 15mm bit for the larger domino. Otherwise this tenon can just end up a bit smaller, just depending how you mill it. But the larger domino could make the mortises very easily in the, in the rails or in the stiles. And obviously this tenon would just be trimmed down a little bit, probably take 15mm off each side, a little bit more on the tops, and then the domino could quite easily make the mortise for this to go into, which I think would be a really good way to construct a door. Since making the set of French doors, I've actually made another single door using the new bits, and from start to finish, from rough wood to glue up, took me about an hour and a half. So that's pretty good. And I would say doing it this way with the integral tenons, not much longer. It's so quick once you set the machine up, bang, bang, bang. I don't know, I made this whole sample in 6-7 minutes on 2 machines. So I'm really liking this idea, and also this would work just as well with the double glazed version. In actual fact, the rebate having to be bigger for the double glazing is going to trim down the width of the tenon for you. So it will essentially cut right through this part of the tenon and make it the right width. So that's another job done. And there we are. That's where we're at this point. Lots of trial and error, lots of mistakes, but that's what it's all about. Lots of learning for me. So I posed the question to my tool makers if they would make a bunch of those router bits. And they were like, yeah, no, but if you have enough, we'll send out to CMT in Italy and they'll just make a bunch of them for us. So I was thinking if anybody's interested in these router bits, which I've made, probably just the double glazing one seems to be the way to go. Feel free to contact me through my website, and we can see how it goes. If there's enough people who are actually interested in buying one of these bits, we can put an order in, send them over to Italy and get them made. No idea what they're going to cost. They'll be nothing like the $700 odd that I spent on my two, but you know, I've no idea. We'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. It was a pretty tough one for me to piece together because there's so many things happening, but I'll see you on the next one.